to introduce more marketing strategies for them to understand the benefits of cooking clean, because yeah, we had to first also understand what are their need, what do they need first, what if we give them these stoves, how are they going to keep them, you know, like we needed to first understand what they need mostly, and again to teach them. So after that, and also I had to mention that there is this transition of, they'd also to understand this transition from the traditional cook modes to the clean ones, which is also something that it can't be understood in a minute. Like we needed to always visit them to their community outreaches, like they held these quartier meetings. So this is where we came, and yeah, this is what we have, this is the solution we're bringing, and this is how you're going to be paying. So after that, they understood that, they received the solution that we're bringing, and then different payment modes was made through installment, through some decided to pay at a go, and there are those who said no, we can pay in 4 or 6 installments. So we try to also be flexible for them to understand what we're bringing. So for it to be successful up to date is we involved the refugees who are our first clients, and they are among our staff who are implementing these projects. And again, there is this intensive marketing strategies and after-sale services that we're doing monthly. And again, we have these outlets, shops that are in the refugee camps and also host communities, so they are able to access and get the products easily. These are stoves and pellets. And again, there are frequent community outreaches, as I said, different gatherings of the community members where we get recommendations from them, the feedbacks, what they think we can change on the product, and explaining to them the best usage of our product. So I can say that this wasn't an easy project to implement, but again, a possible one, because it wasn't something that you can do one day and it's understandable and it is well received. But now I can say that in the last 2 years, some are still paying the stoves, and others has finished to pay the stoves, and again the outlets are still running. And again, I can say that we managed to expand our pellet production line, and by this month we're starting to produce the pellets. So I can say the distribution is going to be it's going to continue, and we want to scale up to Kigali and to more refugee camps. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Caroline, SNV's market-based energy access project in Kenya's Kakuma refugee camp, as well as the electric cooking pilot in the Kaloyebi integrated settlement, are also engaging private sector actors in the supply and distribution of clean cooking solutions. What are some of the project's key achievements and drivers of success so far?
Yeah, thanks. So SNV has been implementing the market-based energy access project since 2017 in Kakuma refugee camp. The project supports market entry for several cooking but also solar companies. And currently this has resulted in availability of various stoves, both locally produced but also industrially manufactured, imported from Nairobi or outside. So quite a diverse set of stoves catering to different end user customer segments, so both for household, commercial, but also institutional use. We also have recently introduced electric pressure cookers targeted at mini-grid customers as part of the refugee camp, which is, by the way, in northern Kenya, for those who don't know, with a population of 200,000 people and has been in existence for the last 30 years. There's now also a mini-grid, and so we have been piloting the introduction of electric pressure cookers through a market-based approach, which is so far seeing positive uptake. So in terms of drivers for success, and although there's still a long way to go, but at least I think the project has proven that there is a market in a refugee camp, and companies can do business there. I think the project, we have a strong private sector-led approach. So the way that our support is structured is that we only do activity-based grant funding focused on market activation. So the companies have to tell us where they need support in, and it's really focused at the market barriers. So it's about sales agents training, it's about marketing, awareness creation, connecting to community leaders, all to drive that awareness. Then we also require co-financing, and we also require them to pre-finance the activities, and we only disperse on actual activities completed. And I think this really supports in having the companies really think what is required to develop a sustainable market, rather than we have to do we have to sell so many units as a service to SNV, because then if that's the case, they wouldn't pre-finance and they wouldn't co-finance. So I think that is quite key. The other thing is that we have a local presence. So our team in Kakuma, we have a large team, and it also consists of members from both the refugee and the host community. And this is, of course, key in terms of really understanding what are the needs, what are the challenges, and having also that type of feedback to our companies. Also, for instance, if the companies aren't actually delivering on their after-sales services, for instance, we can really, we try our best to really protect those interests as well. And then I also really want to make a point that Kakuma, it's really a protected crisis. So it's been there for 30 years. So a market-based approach can't work everywhere, right? And there's really also a need to deliver it in an inclusive manner. With market-based approaches, you expect people to buy products in the market. So there's always people that you exclude. So we really also need to continue to think, how can we deliver this in an inclusive market, and how can you really enable people from all different income levels, new arrivals, but also people that have been living there for a long time to access these products. So it's also really to think about how can you do this in an inclusive manner, and is there a conducive environment to do so? Thanks.
Both of these examples really demonstrate, as we were speaking before, how important the deep understanding of the context is, and understanding where different segments, even within one particular displacement context, or the combination of displacement settings, host communities, and the varied market circumstances within that as well. So even within one program, not assuming that there's a one-size-fits-all approach and there's one provider and one donor and one implementing partner that is capable of delivering that all, and being able to step back and see the big picture, I think, is really important. Emmanuel, in Niger, Mercy Corps is developing LPG value chains by exploring market-based approaches. Can you tell us a little more about your approach and how you're engaging in the full value chain on the LPG side, and really what are some of the key lessons that you've learned that you can share with us today?
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to share with you our experience trying to develop an LPG value chain in Niger. So in Niger, in the Maradi region, there is an influx of refugees from the conflict in Nigeria, and then also there are a set of internally displaced persons. So in total, you are looking at about 100,000 persons of concern. And the influx has really exacerbated the issues around environmental degradation, and Niger basically relies on about 90% plus biomass for cooking. So there's really an acute issues around clean cooking transition. So what Basically, we identified, even the UNHCR in all the policy documents sees LPG as a key solution to the problem, other than, let's say, more of biomass-based solutions because of the acute nature of deforestation in this region. Basically, what we did is to really understand what the key issues around why the private sector is not intervening in these particular settings. So having that data to understand, and then you use that data, we use that data to develop a model with a private sector company that has LPG refilling points across Niger. And what we did to provide a launch pad in support for this private sector LPG guy to set up their refill point tanks close to the settlements, and then we supported them to develop a set of retailing networks to bring the refilling point or the exchange points closer to the camps. So that is one side. You look at from the supply side, but of course once consumers get this, so of course as a startup we provided free kits to the households and one full kit free filled as a startup to the households. Then they're supposed to go back to refill once that is done. But then we have these 15 retailer points which are closer. They go and exchange the bottles once they are done, and then the retailers also earn some commissions for doing that business. Of course, at the community level, we have issues around awareness and safety. And this is very key, especially when you are looking at the issue of protection, especially from UNHCR and do no harm principles. So we had to intensify safety trainings, not only for the consumers, but also for the retailers as well. We raised a lot of awareness, using local languages, and also caravans, open events, to really drive home the importance, the advantages, the benefits that come with this new form of cooking. So far, we've managed to distribute about 1,300 kits to households. And the whole idea is this should be refilled back. Our key lessons and experiences around this, which I would love to share with us, is that number one, as we've seen in most settings, standard markets, growing markets, frontier markets, with the right support, piggybacking, launch padding, helping the private sector to enter into this market, it is possible. It creates some level of interest. If you're able to hack or de-risk their investment, if you're able to help them to acquire the right permissions to work in this camp. Traditionally, it would have taken them, let's say, a year to really get all the necessary permissions from government. But with a humanitarian actor who is already in there, you can use a piggybacking model, then the entry becomes very easier for them. Then it helps them with that. Then, of course, you're also looking at, you can bring in all the end-user financing methodologies, subsidies that could work. Awareness raising was very critical, especially around the safety issues, was very critical for us, for this really to work. So one, with the right incentives, the private sector is willing to intervene in some of these difficult markets with certain conditions. Number two, we've also realized, quite frankly, that about 10% of those kits that we distributed, that we expect them to refill, did not refill. And then we went back through an iteration model, working with the private, to see why the refill did not take place. And what we found out, unfortunately, was that this 10% sold the kits. And the reasons for selling the kits was inadequate food ration to pay for food. And then, so this is an issue that we're working with UNHCR, WFP, and across. It's not only in Niger, even we have identified this issue in other programs in Ethiopia, in Uganda. There has been some level of reduction in ration because of funding related issues. And this affecting other subsets of the program. But this brings to the issue that Vahid you mentioned, for example. When we start response programming, why does energy not feature in addition to food, water, and let's say the other one was shelter? Why does that not? So we need to create that nexus at a go. So that while we are resolving sanitation issues, we are resolving food issues, we're also resolving energy issues at the same time. But going siloed creates a future problem. So that's one of the issues that, the key lessons that we've identified, that we need to look at this as a nexus together while we're trying to address. Otherwise, you provide food, there is not enough energy to process the food or to cook it. Then you go provide cooking stoves, and then there is not enough food to be processed on that. So what happens? As a natural trade-off human behavior, you would do something. You either trade off something for the other. Thirdly, one of the key lessons we learned is about, which you did mention and you as well, about inclusion. Through market segmentation, it enabled us to really segment which sides of the market can pay, may not be able to pay, and also working with UNHCR, using their vulnerability index. We're able to identify very, very vulnerable households. Some people say, which could agree or disagree with them, that a whole camp or settlement is already a vulnerable situation. So, but through segmentation, you can identify various segments and also provide targeted support to the very vulnerable persons of concern, mothers, youth, young people, in this community, otherwise so that you do not leave them behind. And that's one of the things we did, was to say these vulnerable groups that's been identified, we provide them at least for the next 12 months free energy, at least, so that at least they're also part of the ecosystem that we are trying to build. But in fact, at least this has been working. We are in the second year of this project. Hopefully we're able to gather the lessons enough quickly, and then we see if this is expandable, not only in the Nigerian situation, but also to other countries as well. Thanks.
Fantastic. And I think the theme of inclusive, holistic, systemic approaches is something that we're continuing to see throughout the entire conference over the course of this week. And the reason why we need to ensure that those working in all of these spaces towards the same end, whether it's food, shelter, energy, are communicating and working together to ensure that households, as you say, are not they don't compartmentalize all of their needs. They're the needs, and they don't want to be having to make unnecessary trade-offs. So if at the project design, we can ensure that there's a holistic approach, and that there are holistic approaches at the subnational, national, and funding structures, and humanitarian energy needs to be incorporated into national level planning as well, not siloed on its own, so we can ensure funding and support and integration is happening at all levels. And of course, all of these things need to be funded, which is the big question. There is a lot of talk about results-based financing, carbon financing. We're seeing it working in various aspects of the sector. How are you seeing it play out now? I'll start with Vahid and anyone who else wants to join in within displacement context. And what is the opportunity to leverage results-based financing, carbon finance in particular, to be able to scale solutions at the pace that they're required?
Thank you. So at the moment, we are seeing everything. Let's just use Uganda as a great example. We are seeing RBFs, which we actually have been implementing for the past few years. We are seeing carbon financing, and we are seeing the traditional B2C businesses where they're selling to in various settlements of Uganda. So I believe there are a lot of opportunities, but I think what's important to note here is that in terms of RBFs, the mathematics of it has to work. That's number one. So is the supplier or the business that is implementing these RBFs, is the RBF incentives enough for them to stay in business? Because if they have to spend more money, then they have no incentive as a private sector to be able to sell their products. At the same time, is the mathematics of this allows, let's say, the displaced communities to be able to purchase these, let's say, technologies. Number two, the challenge with RBFs or even with carbon is that you need to have user data. Now, working in certain settlements in certain countries, households are not comfortable in providing that information. And if you're doing a carbon program, if you don't have user data, you don't have money. Nevertheless, I think if we can work out some of these challenges, I do believe that carbon finance and RBFs can provide great opportunities for the communities to have access. At the same time, we have to ensure the solutions that we are providing, again, I like to reiterate this, is actually applicable to the culture of cooking. We cannot assume that because this particular technology is working great in terms of thermal efficiency, and this thermal efficiency has higher, we'll say it higher, has a higher thermal efficiency, it impacts the revenue model, so then we have to push this model because it's going to make more money. But then, if no one's going to use this technology, what's the point? This is extremely important that we ensure that we have the right technology for these households in these different contexts. But just to sum up, I believe there are a lot of opportunities, but the mathematics of this has to work out. One last thing in terms of carbon finance, at the moment there are carbon financing projects where it is free distribution. So now you have you're contradicting one another in one settlement. So let's say you're in Bidi camp of Uganda, you have 254,000 people, you have one people are doing RBF, the other one is doing carbon, and one in the middle somehow is trying to survive as a B2C business. So what do? That's a good question, but I believe with the right coordination, which it doesn't normally happen, we can solve these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to touch on the financing and the work that you're seeing in the space?
Yeah, let me also respond, or mostly just add to Fahid. I think the biggest challenge that we still see, at least in Kakuma, is, and it's I think in common in clean cooking, is the high upfront payment price. So indeed, there is a lot of potential and opportunity, for integration of RBF, carbon finance, in terms of subsidizing. Although there are many risks, as Fahid also already pointed out, in terms of unregulation and also unfair competition in a way. And also thinking about the current distribution channels and the entrepreneurs that are there, and then I'll suddenly have to compete with mostly I would say international players that come in with highly subsidized products. So there's a lot of risk there. I think one of the things that we see in Kakuma with our pilot on electric pressure cookers, which within our project we actually sell on market price and even slightly marked up to really reflect, what does it cost to introduce these products that need to come from Nairobi, that need to be sold, so there needs to be margins added in terms of willingness and ability to pay. However, what we did do within the project is that we, as a project, pre-financed the units, and then we are working with a commercial distributor who can sell on pay-go. So we tested different payment models, so 20 weeks, 12 weeks, 4 weeks, and just cash. And of course, cash is slightly cheaper than the credit options. And that we saw that all of and we did sell the units, 80 units that were part of the pilot, to this refugee and host community customers that are connected to a mini grid. And all of them, they choose indeed a 20-week one. What we also had required within the purchasing agreement is that they had a guarantor sign the agreement. And what we saw that they often use a member from a saving group to guarantee. And so far we have seen about 5% of default rates, so this is quite positive. And so it really shows that there is willingness to pay if you focus on the ability to pay. So how you realize this, how you enable these, I would say, flexible payment models, there's different ways, I think. You could, for instance, have a guarantee fund. So there's different ways of thinking about it. So I just wanted to point out that learning from this experience and how important it is to really focus on that upfront payment barrier. Thanks.
Fantastic. And I think it's daunting and exciting to know that there are so many possibilities. It's easy to want to gravitate towards a one-size-fits-all approach and have a roadmap that will work everywhere. But as we've seen across all of clean cooking, but I think particularly in displacement settings where the contexts are so varied, there is a need for design and financing programs to take into account the full variety, and in many cases be using multiple models to serve multiple parts of the population. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. And I see some hands going up if we have some mics in the audience. I think we'll start with 1, 2, and then we'll see how much time we have.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Osarenko. I'm from Up Energy Group. I love the approach we explained. So there's a market approach and there's the humanitarian approach. So you have many players in the industry who operate with either approach. And what I discovered is that in some countries, and I mean a number of countries, you have these cook stoves given free of charge. Possibly the financier, as part of the terms of agreement, you have to give it free of charge. And in the same market, you have people who are paying or subsidizing the stoves. What we observed is that for the countries where the stoves are given free of charge, the end users take these stoves back to the market and sell it, distorting the whole program and making everything difficult for both, for all industry players. That's both those who are using result-based financing model and also carbon financing. What steps are these agencies taking to prevent this from happening? And what are they doing on effective monitoring? Thank you.
Do you want to take this one? It's difficult to hear with the echo, but I think I'll repeat. In many cases, sometimes where stoves are distributed free of charge in displacement settings, you have those consumers going on and selling those kits elsewhere. And so what are some of the measures that agencies and organizations are using to try to remedy that practice?
Sure, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why that happens. Number one, for example, if you go to a context where you're providing a stove that is $80, $90 with a beautiful stainless steel, there is a high incentive for that household to go and use that for scrap metal. So the question is that, do you have the right technology for the context? In some other cases, because there may be some issues of people not having enough food, maybe there's an incentive for them to sell that, let's say the gadget, in order to be able to satisfy some of their short-term immediate needs. But the reality of the matter is this, and I can tell you this confidently because I have implemented many, many projects in humanitarian settings. If you have the right product, households will invest in the value of that product. They will not give it up because they know that product is going to bring value to them. If they know it's going to cut down on the consumption of their firewood and is safe for their families to use, the probability of them keeping that gadget or that technology is very, very high. But if the technology cannot satisfy their cooking needs, or it cannot satisfy the different sizes of pots, or there's not so much value that it brings, therefore the probability of them selling it or for it to become a flower pot or a trash bin is very, very high. And on top of that, the last thing is the approach. For example, with firewood stoves, that's an entirely a different training that you need in comparison, let's say, to charcoal. If you don't have the right training and the right monitoring, then people might not feel comfortable about using that technology. So you have to be able to address that learning curve. And it requires a lot of time. Sorry.
No, thank you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I also wanted to add something on what Vaid has just said. For us, what we do, we first sign a consent with our clients. Because we have learned that when they get objects that way, or gadgets, they end up selling them, and as our colleague said. But for us, signing a consent with them, saying that I'll not sell this, it's my personal all that and that. Like they keep on saying, yeah, this is my object. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to look after it carefully. And the fact that they pay some amount every month, so they cannot decide to sell that object even when they are not yet done paying. So I can say that having that consent between us, the sellers and the customers, it adds on something, like something of how can I say this? Something of ownership and self-reliant on an object. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And one last question, just here in front, if we have the mic. Whoop. Do we have the mic here? Oh, thank you, Manuel.
I'm Jacqueline from Pro-Climate Cameroon. I have a bit of worry because you have been talking about refugees. They are in a camp, yes, in a confined area. What about cases that people are displaced, then they go and resettle in areas where people are already there? What strategy do you use that these stoves, they go to the displaced people, only to the displaced people? And in that case, what if, because these people, they have the likelihood to always move from that area to another area? How do you do in monitoring? They might go at times, there are things like numbers, there are contacts like that, you might not get them again. What strategy do you do to prevent that the stoves remain in the area and things like that for monitoring?
So just to recap, as the echo is quite loud up here, what are some of the strategies in terms of not every displacement situation is a camp where people are confined in a particular area. Many are interspersed with host communities and people are moving around. Are there particular strategies that you've been involved in to ensure that the appliances and the oversight of that project stays sort of, you're on top of it? Is there...
Thank you very much. So we also need to differentiate between IDPs, internally displaced persons, and then what you call your standard refugee term. So with IDPs, that also comes under some kind of different government-related how government wants IDPs to be treated. For refugees, of course, once you are working with refugees, you also have to automatically work with host communities in most or all jurisdictions. Now, in a typical refugee camp, there is a set, let's say, structure. So you have, for example, if it were in Uganda, you have the OPM's office, which as a camp, is like a military camp. So even to exit the camp, at least you need special permissions to exit the camp. If you distributed products in such a scenario, there are structures from that OPMs or that government level up to the local level. So they have all these committees. So to distribute products as a supplier, it is very important to involve this community level. We have the host and refugee committees, their leaders. Even if you're choosing sales agents, you have to make sure that at least you involve these groups. They are able to tell you who is a trustworthy person in the community who can be trusted to be your agent for even revenue collection and all of that. So these are very critical, such that you are able to maintain at least sanctity or integrity of the product movement, so that even if people move, at least you're able to trace them. There's a particular case in Bidi, just to cite, where we distributed tricycles for retailers to use to retail, let's say, briquettes and stoves. One of these guys actually left the camp with a tricycle and sold it. But we just had to go back through the OPMs, through the refugee committee, and we just traced that within 2 weeks, we were able to recover that. So if you use the structures, they know exactly, even if the person left the camp without informing the OPMs or getting exit to leave the camp, even their own people will be able to help to trace some of these things. So it's very important to use local structures that are present as much as possible. Yeah. IDPs.
Internally displaced people? Yes. Yes. I'm sorry, well, yeah.
Did you want to understand more about the cooking provision to IDPs?
Oh, okay. So, look, no? Yes. Well, I mean, the situation with IDPs, let's say living with the host community, because that's your question, right? Actually, I think that there are a lot of opportunities where we also have been able to leverage this relationship. Although there can be some friction here and there, but again, it's about approach. If you have the right approach and you're able to sensitize these communities about the value that you're bringing, you can have harmony and you can build that trust. Now, I mean, I just want to make sure I understand the question. And in fact, I can tell you this. Both in Uganda and Haiti, we had a situation where there was an emergency. In Uganda before, there were lots of IDP context back in 2006 and 2007. And then what happened was, as soon as let's say the emergency phase was ending, we used that opportunity to actually create markets, both in these countries. And initially it's very difficult. But again, it comes down to approach and what you're introducing. Eventually, because the communities were already sensitized on some of the technologies, it was easier to make this transition, let's say from emergency, humanitarian context, whether IDP, whether refugee or returnee or newly arrival, didn't matter, to building a commercial markets. But it again comes down how you establish trust. And trust is the greatest currency that you can have. That's what I can say.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I wish we could keep going deeper and deeper into each of these areas, but I'm going to zoom out for our sort of final word from our panelists and actually just ask, for those of you who have been so deeply involved and so passionately committed to this issue, and there's a daunting task ahead, what is your individual hope for the future of clean cooking in displacement settings? And if you have a particular call to action for any stakeholders who may be in the room, who do we need to take action, to convene, to coordinate, and to participate in this so that we can make progress? And so we'll sort of start. You've got a mic in your hand, Vahid, so I'm going to start there.
Hello. I would say my wish is for the donor community or the investor community to be more educated about what are the realities on the ground. Let us not get so excited about a solution. Let us really understand what are the needs of the people, and then we can go from there. My second wish is that what we are excessively missing, and I'm sorry because I just speak raw, is coordination. The donors just don't coordinate their efforts in these humanitarian settings. So what ends up happening, you have 50 different programs that are all contradicting one another, and guess what? Communities lose trust. They don't want to see another cook stove ever to be introduced to them. But these are all addressable. They're not difficult for us to deal with. We need to come together and the donor community and to have a well-coordinated plan at a country level for these different contexts. That's my wish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Talking about the context of Rwanda, I can say that everyone is on this issue. The issue of unclean cooking modes that are still on, that are still in the countries. So having known this, private sector is truly working on this. We're getting a lot of partnership with the government and other partners. So I keep on calling all of us to work together to go through to go deeper to the needs of the displaced people. There are a lot of needs on the ground. There are a lot of needs in the field, but again, finance is still something that needs to be tackled on. People are getting financed and all that, but again, what is the sustainability? So on this, sustainability has to be tackled on, yes, but again, and again learning on the basic needs and deeper needs from the people that we are working with in these displaced settings. So I can say that there is hope because this has started and this is why we are here, and let's keep on collaboration with different organizations, and unclean cooking modes will be removed fully. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Caroline.
Yeah, as I already mentioned, I think continue to move away from donation-based approaches. So this could be market-based approaches, but in an inclusive manner. And this really requires, you know, an ability from donors to implement long-term, because don't develop overnight, and also flexibility in terms of the approach, because you do operate in a complex and ever-changing context. And then also when you really talk about cooking, and I think it's quite often overlooked, but if you look at gaps and opportunity for impact, it's institutional cooking. In Kakuma, UNHCR is donating every month, so this is every month, 100,000 kilograms of firewood to schools. Most of the schools, they don't have sufficient firewood stoves to actually cook for these thousands of school children. So cooking happens often outside or in broken stoves. So from many perspectives, environmental, cost perspective, nutrition, this is highly unsustainable. And so I really also would urge to, not only talk about household access or commercial access, but also really talk about approaches to address sustainable ways for institutional cooking. Thanks.
Thank you. Colleagues, we've heard the phrase, cooking should not kill, right? But in the context which we are talking about, cooking is issues about SGBV. Cooking is issues about conflict between communities, host and refugees. Cooking is issues about increased tension. I just look forward to a day where cooking should not lead to these risks for women, young people, for communities at all. And for me, if you ask me for a call to action, the disjointed coordination you talk about, I don't think it's only at the donor or the implementation level. You look at the government level. If you look at, there is separate agencies looking at totally refugee services, health, water, energy, separate agencies, which is totally different from the ministries of energy and power you find in various countries. They hardly talk to each other. So for me, and the whole idea is that refugees are mobile people. They will leave. But data, the experience has shown that these communities have stayed. We need to find ways of integrating them into the traditional energy planning scheme. And once we start doing that, let's say the office of the OPM will begin to speak to the Ministry of Energy, and they will begin to find durable solutions to these communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Coordination, collaboration, inclusive, flexible approaches, and everyone coming together to ensure that no one's lives are limited by the way they cook. Thank you, all of our panelists. Please join me in giving them a round of applause and enjoy our drinks. There'll be a wonderful reception for everyone in the courtyard. Get some fresh air, connect. I know we didn't get a chance to answer everyone's questions, but follow up with our panelists and connect with each other. Start the coordination today. Thank you.
Hello, can I just have your attention for a moment? I didn't get a chance to speak about a user-centered design approach that we implemented as one of the successful models in Gambela. So in the break, talk to me if you're interested in that. I'm representing GIZ Energy Solutions in Displacement Settings, which was supposed to be on the panel but didn't manage it.